Here's a question that most people in the audio industry struggle to answer. If you've got two preamps, both made by Neve, both have audio transformers, but they sound completely different when you push them, why is that? And the answer has nothing to do with marketing adjectives like legendary and all of those kinds of words. It has everything to do with physics. So in my last video, I responded to Jim Lill's claim that mic preamps all sound the same, and I used diagrams to show why Class A and Class B designs actually behave differently. And a lot of you guys have heard those terms before, but many people commented that it's the first time they actually saw an explanation of what they really mean, because often they're just thrown around in marketing like Class A as though it's like better because like Class A is like the best class or something, and people don't actually understand what those terms mean. But apparently you guys actually really liked my drawings, so you're in luck because we've got more drawings in today's video. So first off, I'm going to explain the actual differences between even order and odd order harmonic distortion, and I'm going to depict that totally visually with zero math equations involved. So get your popcorn out because here comes some more drawings. So I've just firstly drawn a few dots to help me actually draw this because it's quite difficult to do freehand. But if we draw one big sine wave here, this is our fundamental, and then we can add a harmonic to that. So this is playing at a somewhat higher frequency, and we'll have a look what that frequency is in a minute. But what does it look like when we add these two waves together? Now, I'm not going to be able to draw this accurately at all because it's really difficult freehand. But let's just say it goes up, and then because the harmonic is pulling it down a bit, and then it goes back up because the harmonic is no longer pulling it down as much. And then they both go down, so then we go down a lot, and then the harmonic comes up a bit, so then we have to kind of like counteract the fundamental bit, and then it kind of like goes back like that. So we get this kind of like wave that's starting to look a tiny bit squared off. And if we were to do the same thing and we kept adding higher and higher harmonics in this way, we would end up getting something that looked very much like a square wave. So what order is this harmonic that we've added? Well, we can just have a look here. That's one cycle, there's another cycle in the middle, and on the right there is our third cycle. So we have 3 cycles, and the fundamental is just one cycle, right? So if we call the fundamental 1 and the harmonic 3, well, now we've got an odd harmonic because 3 is an odd number. So if you add together a bunch of odd harmonics at the right kind of volume levels, you get a square wave. If you add them up at slightly different volume levels, you get like triangle waves and other stuff. But let's just say odd harmonics equals square wave for now. So let's now switch it up and do something a bit different with a different amount of dots here. And we have our fundamental frequency here, and now we can draw our harmonic. Now our harmonic is gonna look like this, and what happens if we add that together? Well, it's again difficult to draw, but we might end up with something that looks like that. Now, the exact shapes aren't really all that important. I'm just trying to demonstrate how it looks visually when you add it together. But anyway, we have our fundamental, which is that main big cycle. And then we have how many cycles of the harmonic? We have 2. So 2 to 1, it's an octave up. 2, it's an even, so even order harmonic. But that waveform looks kind of weird. What does it look like when it repeats? Maybe it will look something a bit like this. Now again, this isn't the most accurate drawing in the world, but you get the idea. And if we keep adding higher and higher harmonics to this odd and even order, like a mixture, then we'll end up getting something which looks very similar to a sawtooth wave. And normally you don't just get even harmonics in that own, you normally get a mix of even and odd, which is a harmonic series related to a sawtooth wave. Okay, so now we know about the odd and even stuff. Why do we care about that? Well, like everyone knows, if we get a sine wave and then we clip off the top and the bottom, we square it off, we turn it into more or less a square wave. So now we've got a square wave instead of having a sine wave. And what does that do? We've already seen that that makes odd harmonics. So what we've done is, by doing this symmetrical clipping, symmetrical meaning we've clipped this side and we've clipped this side, both sides being clipped, so we're doing symmetrical saturation here. Symmetrical S equals odd harmonics. We get odd harmonics when we do symmetrical clipping or saturation here. What is the alternative? Or we can draw another sine wave and we can clip it on just one side. What happens if we clip it just one side? Well, now this is not symmetrically clipped. This is asymmetrically clipped because we're only clipping it here, and so it's asymmetrical. Asymmetrical clipping introduces even harmonics. So if we clip only one side, we get even harmonics, and if we clip both sides symmetrically, we get odd harmonics. But the thing is, we don't just get even harmonics, we get a mixture of even and odd. So it's not the waveform here. Now we've got a waveform which looks something like this, and that doesn't look like the waveform that I did earlier, which looks something like, I don't know, something like this. It doesn't look exactly the same, but that's because this is, if we just add one even harmonic, this is what happens if we have a mixture of even and odd and we do some kind of asymmetrical clipping here. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you clip one side or you distort differently between the sides, the fact that it's asymmetrical allows you to have even harmonics. So hopefully that visual-based explanation made sense. That when you clip something symmetrically on the top and the bottom, both sides equally, then you get odd order harmonics. That's what makes it sound increasingly square wave-like as you push it harder and harder. You get thirds and fifths and so on. So there's nothing wrong with odd order harmonics. I actually like the tone of odd order harmonics, but some people refer to that as being more cold. But then when you only distort one side or you distort the two sides completely differently, you get asymmetrical processing. The positive is processed differently from the negative, is asymmetrical, and that leads to generating even order harmonics. But as I mentioned before, you don't normally just get exclusively even order harmonics. It's normally a mixture of odd and even in that case. And it's this asymmetric distortion which people associate with more of a vintage or warm or rich kind of flavor. There's a lot of adjectives that people like to describe that sound, but it's just a blend of odd and even harmonics. But because there's not only odd and there's also those even, it fills the spectrum out more. It is more harmonically rich, and some people like that sound more. They think it sounds more vintage or more creamy or more musical or whatever adjectives you want to assign to that. But that's the kind of 1073 or whatever other kind of vintage class A asymmetrical blah 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 tube circuit kind of sound. So why do preamps like the Neve 1073 produce a lot of even order harmonics, while other preamps, including other Neve designs like the preamp that Jim Lill had, produce predominantly odd order harmonics? And the difference isn't even subtle. It changes the entire character of what the saturation sounds like. Now, in my last video, I basically said that the difference was how hard the transformer was being driven. One, if it wasn't being driven that much, it still has a transformer, but it's not really been driven, then it's just going to clip the transistor, and then it's not really going to sound all that good. It's going to be that cold, kind of square wave type of clipping. Now, I wanted to keep things simple, so I didn't really go into that much more detail about that, but it led a few people to think that just merely driving the transformer gives you that sound. But although you can drive a transformer, it does give you a different sound from clipping because magnetic core saturation is more frequency dependent and it sounds cool and it's got a different kind of tone, right? But it doesn't just magically output even order harmonics because a transformer doesn't just magically asymmetrically clip. It doesn't clip one side of the waveform and not the other, just as default out of the box. So what is the missing link here? How do we get to that sound? What does the Neve 1073 do differently? What is the difference? Where is the magic? Well, it relates directly to what I was talking about in my previous video with the DC offset. aka the bias voltage, aka the quiescent point, aka the Q point. And so let's have a look at another drawing to see that in action. Now let's recap what we learned in my last video on this topic, and if you missed my last video, don't worry because I'm going to go through it very briefly again. So with a Class A amplifier design, you have a quiescent point, otherwise known as a Q point, which is an imaginary 0 volts at somewhere in the middle of your range here, because you can't go minus, and so theoretically you should be going minus with AC, but in this case we don't really have that luxury of doing AC minus and plus, so we're just like not doing the minus portion and we're just doing the plus portion, and we're pretending that in this case 12 volts is our 0 volts, right? But it's not 0, it's 12 volts, we're just pretending, so we're not using the minus at all. So that's what we learned, what a Class A amplifier kind of did in the last video. So let's depict that now, the same thing. So we've got this big range of voltage, positive and negative, that we could potentially send into the transformer. And transformers love AC, we don't need to send it DC. But because of our Class A amplifier, we're only sending it positive with a massive DC bias. Now, unless we want to explode stuff downstream, we need to delete that DC bias. And a transformer will do that for us, no problem. So great. So we're going to hit the transformer with our weird positive only biased DC offset signal, and the transformer is just going to spit out a regular normal AC voltage audio signal based around 0 volts, so that is exactly how we want it. So that's great. We, instead of having this fake 0 volts there, which is the Q point, the bias, right here Q, for that kind of like fake 0 volts, we've actually got real 0 volts now after it comes out the other end of the transformer, which is great. We've deleted all of that DC offset. But what does that mean? It means that we're not actually using any of the negative portion, the like minus volts, we're not using into the transformer. But the transformer actually does like AC. It wants AC, but we're not giving it AC. We're giving it kind of like only the positive and not the negative. So what happens? Well, the whole time we're sitting at that Q point, we're saturating the transformer by like half of its capacity or something, just with this wasteful DC bias, which isn't really doing anything in terms of the audio, it's just pushing it into saturation early. And so it's already kind of closer to saturation. And so when we take our audio signal and then push it a bit further, now it's actually reaching saturation. It will go to 100% of the magnetic core capacity. And now we're going to start to clip on that side, on the positive side of the wave. We're now clipping when it gets up there. But notice on the negative side, we're nowhere near clipping, because in terms of the eyes of the transformer, we've got loads of headroom. We can go all the way down to the other side. We can go all the way negative, but we're not going anywhere near there. We're only going between like 0, and so all that's wasted. That's just like that's pure headroom. So we're not going anywhere near there. So we're not clipping anything at the bottom of the waveform, but we're clipping definitely at the top of the waveform, because the transformer can't cope anymore with all of that DC bias that is going on, the Q point voltage, and the audio on top of it is starting to square off at the top. So we're not squaring off at the bottom because it's got buckets of headroom at the bottom, but at the top we're already starting to square off. So now we're getting that asymmetrical wave. Now, even on my last video, a whole bunch of people commented and said, well, if you've got this DC offset because you've got Class A amplifier, why are you going to use a transformer to remove the DC? Why are you going to do that? Because you're putting the transformer in saturation, like unnecessarily, like running the transformer hot or whatever, like the whole time. Why? It's like you're running the transistors hot here with the Q point, and now you're running the transistor hot here. You're just like turning everything into heat. Why are you like being so wasteful? Why would you do that? Why couldn't you instead just use a simple capacitor? So this is my drawing of a capacitor. It's maybe not the best drawing, but why can't you just use a capacitor? Well, you can just use a capacitor. In this case, it would be called using a coupling capacitor, and capacitors block DC. So yes, you can use a capacitor. There's no problem with using a capacitor. But I was talking about the Neve 1073, and the Neve 1073 uses a transformer for this exact reason, and it doesn't use a capacitor. So that's what I was talking about. So we're talking about the thing I'm talking about. So yes, other designs like API and other preamps from even back in the day use capacitors, but there was this kind of like big war between whether you wanted to use capacitors, and some people thought that the capacitors sucked the tone out of everything, and that transformers are more pure, etc., etc. And so it's up to you which one you're going to select for your design. But a bit of historical context, there was loads of transformers laying about, because in the 60s and 70s, that's like just the tail end of the vacuum tube era, where you had transformers coming out of your ears. So it wasn't like they were in short supply, so it was really easy to get your hands on transformers, and everyone was using them, and Rupert Neve preferred to use transformers. So that is the theory, but does it actually work in practice? Let's load up a DAW now and actually have a look to see how this sounds and how this works actually using real audio. Let's mimic this in Reaper. So tone generator 100 Hertz, we can see that in Pro Q, that we have a 100 Hertz sine wave. I've got a high pass filter to filter out the DC we're going to introduce in a second. Let's now put saturation on. Boom, we can see that that is symmetrical, and we have 300 Hertz, 500 Hertz, we have 700 Hertz, 900 Hertz. These are all odd harmonics coming out of this thing. But now let's simulate our Class A amplifier and add some DC. So on this fader, I've got DC here. That is just a DC offset 0 Hertz. Test tone is DC. And so if we turn up this fader, we will now start getting DC. What happens? Yes, we're introducing even order harmonics. There we go. We have 200, we have 400, we have 600 as well. So there you go, on top of the different types of saturation we can get, if we have a DC offset, we can also introduce even order harmonics, which changes it as well. So yes, you can get different sounds when you push preamps. I still don't do it myself because I track clean. So there you go, we've gone through it in a bit more detail now. To be honest, I wanted to keep it short and sweet in my previous video, and I thought I'd gone on for way too long with the technical drawings, and I thought no one's going to be interested in this, everyone's going to click off the video, everyone's going to be like, this is way too technical. So I wanted to keep it short and sweet. But loads of people love the video. It's my most popular video that I've done for a while now. So I was like, all right, then, if you guys like this kind of stuff, let's do more of it. So I hope you got something out of this video to see how that relates back to the actual characteristics of the saturation. Because in my previous video, I was just like, oh, that's the creamy, magical, mystical sound. And so you guys know that I'm not really a fan of just saying magic, legendary, or whatever. Like, I like to actually explain what is behind that in actual real terms, in actual real physics. Because if you can't describe it in terms of like mathematics or physics or some kind of way, then, and you're just saying it's magic, then it's not a very good explanation. But so let me know in the comments down below. Was this too technical? Was this too geeky? Am I going well into the weeds and this kind of stuff? Or do you guys actually like this kind of my technical drawings